Welcome to Wordpath, the show about Oklahoma Indian languages and the people who are teaching and preserving them. Tonight, we're going to learn about some recent and ongoing research on the Cherokee language. Let me first introduce my guest. Dr. Keith Johnson is a linguist from Ohio State University. Welcome, Keith.
Thank you.
Glad to have you here. First, let me briefly say what area of research we're talking about for the people that may not know anything about linguistics at all. Linguistics is the scientific study of human languages, specifically the study of how language is structured on many different levels. And linguists are the people who work in this area, studying language structure. Now, Keith is a linguist, but we can go further and say that language structure is traditionally divided into several major areas. Phonetics and phonology, which examine the sounds of languages and how sounds interact within a given language. Morphology, which examines the structure of words. Syntax, which is about the arrangement of words into phrases and sentences. Discourse, about the arrangement of sentences into still larger units. And semantics, which is about meaning. So the area of research we're talking about tonight is phonetics,
That's
basically the sounds of language. And Keith, I'll hand it over to you at this point and let you introduce yourself a little better and introduce us to this topic.
Okay. Well, as you said, I'm a linguist and I come from Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio. Although originally I came from here in Norman and grew up here and went to high school at Norman High. And so I get an opportunity to come back to Norman pretty much every year. And so as part of that activity of just coming back to visit friends and family, I've gotten connected up with linguists at the University of Oklahoma, in particular Marcia Haig. And we've been working on some descriptions of the sounds of Cherokee and using some skills that I have as a linguist and a linguistic phonetician to describe Cherokee sounds using computer technology. And with contacts that Marcia Haig has been able to develop, in particular working with Durbin Feeling, who put together one of the first, I think the best dictionary of Cherokee that's out there. I notice you have it on the shelf here, and it's really a wonderful piece of work. So that's the basic background for me. So in one sense, I come from a university that has a lot of linguists. We have a department of about 15 to a place that has a lot of languages and not very many linguists.
Yes, which is interesting. So we're glad to have your help in this state. I'm glad to have you visiting, and I always enjoy talking to you now that we've know each other a little bit. Let me ask kind of a dumb question. I mean, I think I know the answer, but it's something that might occur to a lot of people that don't know a lot about this field. You say you're studying the sounds of Cherokee. Well, hasn't that already been done quite amply? I mean, the Cherokee language has been around for a long time. It's been written for over a century. Don't we already know all we need to know?
I came into this not really knowing the history and the background of how much work had gone into it. And so I went to Durbin Feeling and asked him if there was anything that he wanted to know that I could do. And I think that was one of the best moves that we made in doing this research, was to contact Durbin and just ask his advice. What do you need? And so he put us on to tones and to ask us to pay particular attention to the pitch patterns, the patterns of voice during words in Cherokee. And so, yes, there's been a lot of work done, but in another sense, a lot of the work has been done by ear. As we listen and try to write down in the phonetic alphabet as accurately as we can the sounds that people say. And so with the development of some techniques where we can use a computer to make it easier to play back sounds and listen to them over and over again, get a better feel for what they sound like that way. And also with technology that lets you, say, draw a pitch contour fairly accurately for what the voice is doing during the speech, and actually see a picture of the tones was something that Durbin was quite interested in. And so that's a large part of what we've been doing.
So by again, let me just ask you to clarify for people, when you talk about a pitch contour, that's when your voice goes up and down, and it's literally like a line that goes up and down? Is that the display?
Yeah, I don't know if this would be a good time to show some of this.
Yes, but, we're going to try. We hope that the computer will show up well enough that people can appreciate this a little bit. Maybe you could demonstrate a pitch contour, or wherever you want to start.
Okay. Well, let me start by demonstrating a couple of words in Cherokee that differ primarily from each other just by the pitch of the voice. And so, I don't know if this is going to come through on the screen okay, but here's a recording. Actually, this one is of Durban Feeling in 1971, off of an old recording. Play that again. These two words, salt and water, differ from each other primarily in the pitch of the voice. And so at the bottom of the screen, we see the same two words again. And what I've got here is a recording of a bunch of different people saying the same two words so that we can hear some of the variation. But as we see, one of the contours shows a bit of a rising pitch here in the dots that go up, and another one starts at a little lower pitch. You'll see this in another speaker, the same sort of thing. And so here the speaker goes from higher pitch to lower for one word, and from lower pitch to higher in the other. This speaker, female speaker, also doing the same word. So I don't know if you hear the difference very clearly. A lot of English speakers have trouble with this kind of a distinction. Ma, ma.
I was about to say, and this is just as someone who is an ignoramus about Cherokee, just listening to the two words myself, the first one not only sounded like it had two more even tones, but it sounded like the first vowel
is much
was
longer.
a little longer.
Yes.
Ma, as opposed to ma.
This is the other distinction that is a little hard for us as English speakers to get a hold of, but it's a very common pattern in other languages of the world, including Cherokee.
Right.
And so
both of these things are going on in the Cherokee language, the vowel length difference and the pitch difference. And so you're able to sort that out better with the help of the technology, more kind of objectively, I guess, because you can play this again and again for various linguists, have a lot of people listen to it as many times as you like, juxtapose different speakers saying the same thing.
And we also pulled numbers out of the analysis, so as I move a cursor across and look at different places on the screen, what we get are values like 171. This is number of times per second that the vocal folds touch each other.
So it's a frequency.
Yeah, it's a frequency measurement, and that corresponds to the pitch that you hear during that. And so we can make fairly detailed measurements like that. And
now, that's something that I would assume, again, my strength is not phonetics in all of the linguistics that I've studied, but I would assume that that particular number of 170 or however many cycles it is going to vary somewhat according to who's speaking too, because some people have higher voices.
Yeah.
But so what is it? That's sort of interesting that humans are able to make these pitch distinctions, even though the absolute frequency is not the same from one speaker to another.
From another.
So Durban might say a certain pitch at 170 cycles, and this woman that was at the end of your play there, she might say it faster, a little bit higher.
Much higher.
Higher frequency.
And
it's still the human ear or the human brain somehow is able to sort this out. I guess we sort of perceive it in a relative kind of way, apparently.
Exactly. It's a kind of normalization for, well, how high or low does that person's pitch typically go?
Isn't it amazing? All the calculations our brains are doing in just a few seconds of speech.
Yeah.
That's really impressive.
Now, one of the things that I showed you here, I said I had a recording of Durban Feeling saying the two words that we're illustrating. Actually, I have two recordings of Durban, one in 1971 and one in 1999 that we made. I'd just like to play those back to back to each other. I think maybe just so that...
Now we have a nice close-up on the screen now. Can you sort of explain to us a little bit what we're seeing on the screen of the computer?
Sure.
What are these darker blobs at the top and the tracings at the bottom?
The dark part at the top is we're seeing what the microphone sees when we make the recording. And so this is the microphone signal, sort of an acoustic waveform, it's called. And so the first blob here is the first word, ama. The second blob is ama. The next is this first word repeated again, ama. Only this time we get to see there's an M in there. You see the little notch. That's where the M is. And here's another ama with the shorter vowel at the beginning. You can see that that's shorter than this is. And so these are basically 4 words, one right after the other.
Okay.
If we play them, had a little bit cleaner recording in 1999 also.
Right.
Okay. And so even within one person, we see a little bit of difference in the pitch pattern. So he's a little higher in these and a little lower in these. 30 years difference.
Means his voice is getting a little deeper as he ages.
Maybe so. Maybe so.
Yeah.
But
or it could just be an incidental thing.
Yeah.
He was speaking slightly lower one day than another.
One thing that I did was in the older recordings, he was speaking them in sentence context, and so I extracted these out of a sentence and put them side by side. They were minutes apart on the tape, and that's one of the things you can do with the computer technology fairly easily, is kind of edit things to put them side by side so you can hear a comparison, even though the talker isn't making the comparison explicitly, to try to emphasize how different they are. We get to see the two of them close together like that.
Well, this is pretty fascinating stuff, very high tech, and it's sort of neat what you can do, but let me ask you a general question about this, which is, I can see how that's fun to play with, and it's a researchy kind of thing to do.
Yeah.
You have your curiosity as a scholarly person who wants to know more about the language.
Right.
But does it have any direct bearing on, say, the teaching or the learning of the Cherokee language?
Yeah. There's a couple of things that are involved. One is that it's important to document how people pronounce languages. And especially as the number of speakers of a language decreases, people get more and more shaky about, well, how do you say it? Do you say it this way? Do you say it that way? And so by focusing on audio signals and getting them archived and saved for a future reference is something that we're doing with this. One thing I didn't mention is that in working with Durbin Feeling, he got together with his colleague William Pulte and gave us some tapes from the time when they were putting the dictionary together back in the 70s. And we digitized those and put them onto CD and deposited copies of them with the Cherokee Nation, with the Oklahoma Historical Society, and then here at OU also. So that those are going to be available for people to listen to in the future. And then working with Durbin about how do we write the tones, what's a good way to describe how to move the pitch of voice while you're talking. As a teacher, that's what he wanted. He wanted us to give a good, simple description so that he could teach it more easily. Kids don't have any trouble picking up on these things, but you sort of need to explain what to do to adults.
Right.
And so knowing how to explain that is part of what I'm doing.
Yes.
By coming up with a good description of, well, how do people say things in a good, simple kind of way that takes into account exceptions and so on. What we're doing is giving a good way to explain how to say it.
And that's important because I've seen situations many times where a fluent native speaker will pronounce a word in the language and the student will pronounce it and they'll say, no, that's not quite it, listen carefully, and they'll repeat it again. And the student repeats the same mistake again, and they say, no, listen again, they repeat it again, saying it correctly. The student makes the same mistake because they don't know what it is, they don't know where it's off. They know it's not quite right, but they don't have a kind of a way of making themselves change the right part so it gets more accurate.
And as a teacher, you're very frustrated also when you don't know what to say to get the person to say it right.
You want them to say it more like you, but it's just nice if you can explain that a little bit.
Yeah, instead of slapping the table.
No, I said say it like I said. Of course, people are usually very nice about this, but what happens sometimes is that the teacher will just get discouraged and go, well, maybe our language is too hard. Maybe.
And it's not too hard. It's just that languages that are being studied for years and years and years and being taught to adults for years and years and years have developed all of this pedagogy, how to teach it. And a large component of that is basic linguistic research, like the research that tells you which words are the most frequently used. Textbooks will start out with the most frequent ones and go on to less frequently used words later. And these discussions about how do you say that hla sound in Cherokee,
Yeah, very interesting. So what kinds of, you've been looking at pitch, are there other interesting questions you've been looking at? Or what other kinds of results have you been getting from your studies?
Should you instruct a student in learning Cherokee to say the vowel with nasalization? Should it be or like that instead of And we find that people seem to vary as we listen to more speakers of Cherokee. That some people have more of that nasal quality than others. And so there may be some room for variation. But this was something that we were interested in looking at the old tapes for, to see if things were a little more consistent 30 years ago. Maybe that would tell us something about the change of the language over the last 30 years and give teachers and scholars of the language a little more to work with as to describing what kind of vowel is that.
So what are the oldest tapes that you've been listening to?
Well, we've been listening to tapes from the early 70s, 1971, 72, 73.
So about 30 years.
About 30 years.
Do you have any sense that the language has changed in any way during that time?
Not much. Some of the older speakers on those old tapes sound different. One of the differences is we hear speakers nowadays saying sounds like the P or the T and the K in Cherokee with a lot of aspiration noise. You know, with a lot of
more like the English.
Yeah. And I don't hear as much of that in the older tapes. We're currently doing the computer analysis, taking measurements to try to document, well, exactly how much noise is there right after the release. When you say move the tongue away from the roof of the mouth, how much of a gap is there?
How many milliseconds?
Milliseconds of voice onset time, they call it,
Yeah.
So.
Well, really interesting. So if you find, when you finish that analysis, if you find that people are aspirating their stops more, having more of that breathy sound that's characteristic of English and not of old Cherokee, do you then advise people to try to listen to the old recordings, or what do you make of that in terms of the language learning aspect?
That's a decision for the speakers of the language. I'm providing some information and saying, here's some facts, and you do with it what you will. You know, it's not my language. I'm kind of the outside person looking in on what's going on with the language. I find it kind of interesting from an intellectual point of view, and at the same time something that I can try to do to give things back to Oklahoma, kind of keep a tie with Oklahoma. But what happens with the research that I do is up to the people who own the language.
That's interesting. We've sort of gotten into the topic now of relationships between academic people and native people in their communities that are doing language preservation work. But of course that sort of begs the question of, well, how come there would be this juxtaposition that the academics would not be Indian and the Indians would not be academics? There's a whole social question there. But is there any, I don't know, do you have anything to say about that? I'm a big advocate of trying to get more Indian people in Oklahoma to get some training so that they can do some of their own work, or at least appreciate, you know, the questions that other academic people might bring up better.
One thing that I'm kind of excited about is the program here at Oklahoma University of teaching the languages in the anthropology department here in the Native American Studies Center. And so I was happy to see them hire Durbin Feeling recently. Good for him. You know, he's just delighted to be able to teach in that program. And I was talking with him yesterday about what he plans to do here, and he said second edition of the dictionary. He's going to be working on scholarship, you know.
Very good.
And that's
so here's a person with graduate training in linguistics. Has been a linguist for many years, and is a native speaker of the language. And
I was really happy
and has done language
to see
preservation in the community. And he's now at OU, and he's going to really crank into gear, I guess.
It sounds like it,
that's wonderful.
We just need to egg him on and stay on his tail and do that work.
So I expect you'll be getting more requests from him as to certain phonetic aspects that he'd like you to look at when you have time to take on something new. You've also worked with some other Oklahoma languages, haven't you?
I have,
you want to say just a brief word about that?
Okay. Yeah, I had the opportunity to work with Margaret Malden and Jack Martin on Creek. And they asked me for to answer some specific questions about how to write some of the words. The question had to do with some of the vowels of the language and how should we write these. They're preparing a dictionary of Creek and wanted to know, two of the vowels sounded like they were getting really similar to each other in certain contexts. They wanted to know are these very different from each other? We have a hard time hearing the difference, but can you pull them apart and see differences when you look at them this way? So I was happy to be able to work on that, and Jack and I published a paper just recently in a journal called Phonetica, and we have another one coming out in the International Journal of American Linguistics looking at the tones of Creek. And that was a question that Jack also wanted to document. I think he knew the answers. When I made the physical measurements of how do people's vocal cords vibrate, he was dead on, right, in his descriptions.
So that commends him as a very,
very
able
he was
linguist.
glad to have somebody say.
When you're publishing research and discussing it with other people, because of this thing that you said, that so much work before the advent of this modern technology has been just sort of it's been sort of a judgment call, a perception.
Yeah. And people argue
sometimes
about it.
disagree, and argue about it. So it's nice to be able to nail down the facts
Yeah.
before you go building a theory around it or something. Or constructing spellings, that may last for a long time. You want to have them based on accurate information.
Yeah.
Well, that's really, really interesting. I have down here, if we had time, that we might come into, we might bring up the question of the ethics of fieldwork. Is there anything you'd like to say about that?
Yeah. I'm not a specialist in the ethics, and I've not paid close attention to some of the debates. I know there's a lot of debate about should a person be doing field work or not, or how should you behave. And for me, I try to take the cues from the people that I'm working with, and in particular, I try not to be possessive about a language.
Right.
I'm an outsider, and I'm always, I know I am, and I don't want to try to jump in and start acting like I'm, I own something here. And I have some particular skills and interests and things that are interesting to me.
Right.
And I try to describe what I can do and why to linguists who are working on languages, like Durbin and Margaret Malden and Jack and Marcia Haig, and just let them know what I have to offer, and if it's of interest, and if there's something that I can contribute to the work, then I'm ready to go. But I don't know that works for everybody, to have that sort of, it's a little bit of a standoffish kind of stance, but that's one that I think is working so far for me, and I hope that I'm providing some useful input to people.
It sounds like you really are, and I think it's, I agree with everything you said. I think, to me, I sometimes look at it as a question of agenda. Whose agenda is it here? And I like to see it always being the language community's agenda, the indigenous leaders within that community saying, well, these are our needs. Let's see who we can find that we might care to help us with this. In other words, it comes from that side, not from the academic person saying, well, this is my theory, what are my needs, and what Indian community can I find that might feed into the way I'd like to present some facts. So, you obviously have it the right way around.
Thank you.
It looks like we have about 5 minutes left. Let's see what else we can talk about. I know you were just saying you like to be in touch with linguists that are working on languages and stuff. I know of a few languages already that we could put you to work on if and when you have time. Are there any other languages you've worked on so far in the state?
We're getting ready to do some work with Cheyenne, and I'll be back teaching a course at University of Oklahoma in the spring.
That's right. I wanted to get that in. What is your course going to be
I'll
called?
be teaching a course in phonetics where we will focus on writing phonetically using the International Phonetic Alphabet and a little bit of the technology that I was talking about here if we're looking at sounds. The exciting thing about this technology is that there are now packages that you can download onto your computer. You don't have to go out and spend a bundle.
I know, it used to be you had to get $1 million NSF grant to look at any of these facts in the laboratory, and now
things
you
are
can do it on
really
your own
changing.
desktop.
Things are really changing. So we try to teach people how to use the available free technology.
Great.
So that if they find it useful and want to do that, it's not a huge investment to get involved with something like that. And then we'll also be teaching a little seminar course on Cheyenne Just a bit of description. Partly it's just to help me get into the language and work on the phonetic descriptions that we've been asked to provide.
Do you know yet what particular aspects of Cheyenne are going to be studied?
Yeah. We're interested in how variable the vowels are. There's a small inventory of vowels, but they come around consonants that shift them around a little bit. And so we're interested in how much they shift and what sort of descriptions of those vowel changes we can describe so that, or descriptions that we can give so that learners will have a little better handle on how to pronounce things so that it sounds pretty natural.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you're going to be pretty busy, but maybe at the end of the spring when you're done with that next chunk of work, I might suggest some work to you to do on Ponca.
Yeah.
I can think of two things offhand. One is we just, about a year ago, the Ponca Language Arts Council, of which I'm privileged to be a member, basically as a group we examined all the different ways of writing that had been used for Ponca, tried to come up with a user-friendly list of symbols that would be adequate to cover all the important sounds. And totally consistent, sort of linguistically based system so that the students would be able to quickly learn how to read and write anything they wanted to in Ponca. And I think we came up with a good solution. I mean, we're pretty, there's a couple of words where we're not quite always sure between two consonants. For instance, a voiced r and a voiceless ch seem to sort of blend in the middle of a word. These are things that, you could certainly look at on a computer, and it might be that we're just not quite hearing them acutely enough to be able to hear the difference. Or maybe they really are the same there. Another one is we debated whether we should use an accent mark to mark certain syllables as more heavily stressed than others, because there certainly is a difference between syllables. But the other linguist and I who were working with the group, Kathy Shea and I, we didn't feel like we understood the phonetics and the phonology enough yet to be sure. It seemed like it might be at least partially predictable what syllable you accent, but it's not always the first syllable or anything that simple. And so we've taken the strategy of writing an accent mark on the main accented syllable because we think the students will be able to see that mark and come up with a better pronunciation. But figuring out how accent really does work in the language would be a wonderful thing to do, and I would think your kind of research might contribute to that a lot.
Well, I mentioned earlier that I come from a place with a lot of linguists to a place with a lot of languages.
Right.
And I think that's one of the key problems that I see in Oklahoma is a lack of kind of trained linguistic workers.
I do wish we had more people here. There's more than enough work to go around.
I certainly find it.
Bring some more people and get some of your friends to come in and help out too. Well, listen, we're about out of time, but I want to thank you for coming, Keith. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you very much.
People have appreciated learning a little bit about your field of study. I do think it's very useful, and we're really glad to have you in Oklahoma whenever you can be here.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Okay.
And I'll see you next time on Wordpath.
Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pele manaone kita. Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pele manaone kita. Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pele manaone kita. Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pele manaone kita. Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pele manaone kita.